It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. A man in a business suit walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter in Portland, Oregon. He bought a one-way ticket to Seattle. He used cash. The name on the ticket was Dan Cooper. He was in his mid-40s, about 6 feet tall. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He carried a briefcase. He looked like any other businessman on a short flight. He boarded the Boeing 727. He sat in the back, seat 18C. He ordered a bourbon and soda. The plane took off. After a few minutes, he handed a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. She thought he was just another lonely businessman giving her his number. She put it in her purse. He leaned closer. "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." She opened the note. It was printed in neat, all capital letters. It said he had a bomb in his briefcase. He wanted her to sit with him. She did. He opened the briefcase just a little. She saw red sticks and wires. It looked real. He was calm. He was not nervous. He told her his demands. He wanted $200,000 in 20s. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes, and he wanted a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refuel the plane when they landed. The flight crew did what he said. The pilot told the passengers there was a mechanical issue. No one on the plane knew they were being hijacked. The man was polite the whole time. He even paid for his drink. The flight attendant said he was a gentleman. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't loud. He was just in control. The plane landed in Seattle. The airline had the money and parachutes ready. The money was in a bag. It was all unmarked $20 bills. An airline employee brought the bag and the parachutes onto the plane. Cooper let all the passengers and 2 of the flight attendants go. He kept the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant on board. While the plane was refueling, Cooper talked to the crew. He knew a lot about planes. He talked about the 727's design. He specified the flight path he wanted: fly to Mexico City. Stay below 10,000 feet, keep the landing gear down, keep the wing flaps at 15 degrees. This would keep the plane flying slow, around 200 miles per hour. The crew told him they couldn't make it to Mexico City with that setup. He was fine with that. They agreed on a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. He also had one last, very strange request. He wanted the aft stairs lowered. The Boeing 727 had a unique feature: a staircase at the back of the plane that could be lowered in flight. The crew was worried. It was dangerous, but Cooper insisted. He knew what he was asking for. The plane took off from Seattle around 7:40 p.m. The sky was dark. It was raining hard. The crew was in the cockpit. The flight attendant was told to stay there with them. Cooper was alone in the back of the plane. Around 8 p.m., a warning light came on in the cockpit. It meant the aft staircase was open. The pilot asked over the intercom if he needed anything. Cooper's last words were no. Sometime after 8 p.m., somewhere over the dense, cold forests of southwestern Washington, Dan Cooper walked down the stairs with the money and jumped into the night. He was never seen again. The name D.B. Cooper came from a police and media mix-up, but it's the name that stuck. The man on the plane was just Dan Cooper. Who was he? That's the real question. For over 50 years, people have tried to answer it. The FBI started one of the longest and most expensive investigations in its history. They called it NORJAC, for Northwest Hijacking. They interviewed hundreds of people. They checked criminal records. They chased down leads all over the country. They had a few things to go on. They had a physical description. They had a sketch. And they had his DNA from the cigarette butts he left behind. They had his black clip-on tie. And they had a profile. The man was smart. He planned this. He knew about planes and parachutes. He was calm under pressure. He was not a desperate man. He was methodical. He probably had some military experience, maybe as a paratrooper. But the jump he made was incredibly risky. It was pitch black. It was freezing cold. He was jumping into a rugged mountainous wilderness. He was wearing a business suit and loafers. Most experts thought he died. He would have hit the ground hard. If he survived that, he would have frozen to death. But they never found a body. They never found a parachute. They never found the briefcase or the money bag. For years, there was nothing. The case went cold. The public, however, never forgot. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero. A guy who beat the system and got away. He was the ghost who slipped through the FBI's fingers. And then, in 1980, a little boy named Brian Ingram was digging a fire pit on a sandbar on the Columbia River. The spot was called Tenabar. He found 3 bundles of cash. The money was old and falling apart. But the serial numbers matched. It was Cooper's money. About $5,800 of it. This was the first real piece of evidence found outside the plane. But the money created more questions than answers. How did it get there? The bundles were still held together with rubber bands. This meant the bag must have disintegrated, but the bundles landed intact. Scientists studied the sediment on the bills. They believed the money washed down a river and was deposited on the sandbar. It didn't just land there from the sky. This suggested Cooper might have landed in or near a river. But which one? And where was the rest of the money? And where was Cooper? The discovery proved he was real. It proved the money was real, but it didn't lead them any closer to finding him. Over the years, the FBI considered over 1,000 suspects. Most were quickly dismissed. But a few have stuck around. These are the men who, for one reason or another, fit the profile. They had the right skills, the right background, or maybe someone in their life thinks they were the hijacker. The list of serious suspects is short, but the stories are deep. One of the first and most famous suspects was a man named Richard McCoy Jr. On the surface, the case for McCoy is strong. 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, in April 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight. The details were almost identical. He had a fake bomb. He demanded a huge ransom and 4 parachutes. He also jumped out of the back of a Boeing 727. It looked like a copycat crime. Or maybe it was the same guy trying it again. McCoy was a Vietnam veteran, he was a Green Beret and a pilot. He was an expert parachutist. He knew how to jump. He matched the general description of Cooper. When the FBI caught him for his own hijacking, they considered him for the Cooper case. But they eventually ruled him out. The main reason was that McCoy had a solid alibi. He was at home in Utah having Thanksgiving dinner with his family the night Cooper jumped. His family swore to it. Also, the flight attendants who saw Cooper up close did not identify McCoy in a photo lineup. They said he didn't look like the man. McCoy was convicted for his hijacking and sent to prison. He escaped in 1974. He was killed in a shootout with the FBI a few months later. A book was written arguing that McCoy was Cooper. The authors claimed his alibi was fake and that the government covered it up. But the FBI stands by its decision. They believe McCoy was a copycat inspired by Cooper's story. He saw the news and thought, I can do that too. Another prominent suspect is Duane Weber. This story comes from his wife, Jo. On his deathbed in 1995, Duane Weber told her, I'm Dan Cooper. She didn't know what he meant at first, but after he died, she started digging. She went to the library and read about the hijacking. The more she read, the more she believed him. Her husband had a mysterious past. He had a criminal record. He served time in prison. He looked a lot like the composite sketch of Cooper. He had an old knee injury, one he said he got from jumping out of a plane. He once had a nightmare where he talked in his sleep about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. Before he died, he told her to go to a specific bank and look in a safe deposit box. She couldn't get into it, but she found an old plane ticket in his wallet. It was for a flight from Seattle. Jo Weber contacted the FBI. They were interested. They compared her husband's DNA to the DNA found on Cooper's tie. It wasn't a match. They showed his picture to the flight attendants. They didn't recognize him. The case for Duane Weber is based almost entirely on a deathbed confession from a known con man. It's a compelling story, but it lacks hard evidence. The FBI officially cleared him. Then there's the story of L.D. Cooper. This one came from his niece, Marla Cooper. In 2011, she came forward with a story about her uncle. She said she remembered him coming to her house for Thanksgiving in 1971. He was beat up, he had injuries, the family said he was in a car accident, he was gone for a long time after that. She also remembered him and her other uncle planning something suspicious. They were using walkie-talkies. Marla said her uncle was obsessed with a comic book hero named Dan Cooper. This character was a test pilot who had adventures in a Canadian comic. The name was a perfect match. L.D. Cooper was a logger in Oregon. He was a woodsman. He knew the area where the hijacker jumped. He was a veteran, though. It's unclear if he had parachute training. Marla also claimed her uncle left behind a guitar strap that she believed had Cooper's DNA on it. She gave it to the FBI. The results were inconclusive. The problem with the L.D. Cooper theory is that it's all based on faded childhood memories and family lore. There's no physical evidence linking him to the crime. The FBI looked into him, but like the others, he was never officially named as a suspect. In recent years, one name has dominated the conversation: Robert Rackstraw. A team of private investigators, led by a documentary filmmaker named Thomas Colbert, spent years building a case against him. Their theory became the subject of a History Channel documentary and a book. The case for Rackstraw is, at first glance, very compelling. Rackstraw was a decorated Vietnam veteran. He was a pilot. He had extensive parachute training. He was in the Special Forces. He had the skills to survive the jump. He was a man who took risks. He was kicked out of the Army for lying about his education. He had a history of criminal charges, including check fraud and possession of explosives. He was a chameleon, a man who could disappear. Colbert's team pointed to coded letters. They claim Rackstraw sent to newspapers after the hijacking, taunting the police. They also believed he was part of a larger conspiracy and that he had help on the ground. They pointed to his physical resemblance to the sketch, though he was much younger than the description at the time. The FBI looked at Robert Rackstraw in the late 1970s. They interviewed him, and they cleared him. They said he didn't match the physical description given by the flight attendants. He was 28 at the time. The hijacker was described as being in his mid-40s. Colbert's team argues that the age was part of the disguise. Rackstraw, for his part, played coy with the accusations for years. He never gave a straight answer. Sometimes he seemed to hint that he was Cooper, other times he denied it. He died in 2019, taking any secrets he had with him. Most independent researchers in the FBI remain unconvinced. They believe the case against him is circumstantial and relies on a lot of speculation. A lesser-known but interesting suspect is Walter Pica, who later changed his name to Walter Recca. His story came out after his death in 2014. A close friend of his, Carl Lauren, came forward with hours of recorded conversation. In these tapes, Recca seems to confess to being D.B. Cooper. He talks about the hijacking in great detail. Recca was a military veteran and an experienced parachutist. He was a member of the Michigan parachute team. He had the skills. Lauren claimed that Recca called him the night of the hijacking, and they talked about how it went. The details in Recca's confession are specific. He talks about how he chose the drop zone, how he landed near a town called Cle Elum, Washington, and how he got help from an accomplice who met him at a diner. This would explain how he survived. He wasn't lost in the wilderness, he had an exit plan. The location he named Cle Elum is outside the FBI's original search area, which could explain why nothing was ever found there. A researcher who looked into the theory even found a man who remembered a stranger coming into his diner that night, matching the description. But there are problems with the Rico story too. Why did his friend wait decades, until after Rico was dead, to come forward? Is it a true story, or a fabrication for attention? The physical evidence is thin. And like the others, the FBI has not publicly supported this theory. The details are compelling, but without something concrete to back them up, it remains just another story. Beyond these main suspects, there are dozens of others. There was a man named Kenneth Christensen, a former Northwest Airlines purser, who looked like the sketch and had a suspicious deathbed confession. There was a woman named Barbara Dayton, a recreational pilot and skilled parachutist, who was born a man and underwent gender reassignment surgery. And she claimed she staged the hijacking to get back at the airline industry. Each story has its own set of clues and its own set of holes. So where does that leave us? We have a handful of compelling suspects, but no solid proof for any of them. The investigation has moved from searching the forest to searching the lab. The key piece of evidence that could solve the case is the tie Cooper left on the plane. In the early 2000s, scientists were able to analyze the tie using an electron microscope. They found thousands of tiny particles on it. Most of the particles were normal things you'd find on a piece of clothing. But they also found particles of pure unalloyed titanium. This was rare in 1971. It wasn't used in consumer products, it was used in high-tech industries, especially aerospace. This suggests Cooper might have worked at a place like Boeing or a subcontractor that worked with metals. He could have been an engineer or a manager. This detail doesn't perfectly match any of the main suspects. Rackstraw had a military background, not a high-tech manufacturing one. McCoy was a truck driver. L.D. Cooper was a logger. This scientific evidence points in a different direction, toward a man who worked with his hands, but in a very specific, advanced industry. The scientists also found diatoms, a type of algae, on the tie. The specific combination of diatoms found on the tie was also rare. This could help pinpoint where Cooper lived or worked if they could ever find a matching sample. The tie is the best clue we have. It's a direct link to the man himself, but so far, it hasn't led to a name. Let's go back to the jump itself, the central question of survival. Most experts in parachuting and survival are firm on this. Cooper most likely died. The conditions were terrible. A 200-mile-per-hour wind in his face with freezing rain. It was pitch black, he had no way to see the ground, he was jumping into a sea of giant Douglas fir trees. His parachute could have easily gotten tangled. If he managed to land without breaking every bone in his body, he would have been in the middle of a vast, cold, and unforgiving wilderness wearing only a suit. He had no survival gear, the odds were stacked against him. The fact that the money was found in a riverbed also supports this theory. It's possible. Cooper landed in or near a river, drowned, and his money bag eventually broke apart, releasing a few bundles to be found years later. The rest of the money, and Cooper himself, could be at the bottom of a river or buried in mud somewhere. But there's always that small chance. What if he was an expert? What if he was lucky? What if he knew exactly where he was and had a plan? What if he had help on the ground? The romantic version of the story, the one we all love, is that he made it. He walked out of the woods, started a new life with his money, and is still out there somewhere, an old man with a hell of a secret. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case. They said they were dedicating their resources to other priorities. They had chased down every credible lead. They had investigated thousands of suspects. After 45 years, they were no closer to an answer than they were in the beginning. They will still accept physical evidence, like a parachute, or the rest of the money, if it ever turns up. But they are no longer actively searching for D.B. Cooper. The file remains open. The mystery remains unsolved, and that's a huge part of its appeal. It's the perfect crime. It was audacious, it was non-violent, nobody got hurt, and the bad guy got away clean. Or he died trying, we don't know. And that not knowing is what keeps the story alive. So, who was the real D.B. Cooper? Was he Richard McCoy, the copycat who was actually the original? Was he Duane Weber, the con man who told the truth on his deathbed? Was he L.D. Cooper, the uncle with the dark secret? Was he Robert Rackstraw, the highly trained veteran who played games with the law his whole life? Or was he Walter Recca, the parachutist with a detailed confession? Or was he none of them? Was he just a quiet, unassuming man who worked in a metal fabrication plant? A guy who was sick of his life and decided to do something extraordinary. A man whose name we will never know because he was just an ordinary person who, for one night, became a legend. The evidence points in different directions. The suspects all have compelling arguments for and against them. The tie suggests a man from the aerospace industry. The knowledge of the plane suggests a pilot or an airline employee. The skill of the jump suggests a paratrooper. It's possible one man had all these skills. It's also possible he was just a clever amateur who got lucky. Maybe the best answer is that D.B. Cooper is not a single person anymore. He's an idea. He's a symbol of rebellion, of sticking it to the man. He represents the fantasy of escaping your life and starting over. He's the modern outlaw, a ghost who jumped out of a plane and into American folklore. We may never have a definitive answer, no DNA match, no final confession that checks out, no discovery of a parachute with a skeleton attached. All we have is a story. A story about a man in a suit, a bomb in a briefcase, and a leap of faith into the dark. The search for Dan Cooper's true identity will probably continue as long as people love a good mystery. But the man himself is gone, lost to the rainy Washington night, taking his secret with him. And maybe that's how it should be.